Hello everyone, and welcome back to Sleeple's Campfire. Tonight, we return to the swamps of Florida, those vast wetlands where cypress roots twist beneath black water and the boundary between solid ground and liquid darkness becomes impossible to judge. These are places where heat hangs heavy, even after sunset, where the chorus of insects and frogs can stop without warning, and where rangers patrol territories so remote that help might be hours away. The stories you are about to hear come from incident reports filed with the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, recorded ranger testimonies, and archived emergency dispatch logs. Each account has been verified through official channels and cross-referenced with witness statements. These are not campfire tales passed down through generations. They are documented encounters experienced by trained professionals in the line of duty. The Everglades, the Fakahatchee Strand, the Apalachicola Basin. These wetlands cover millions of acres. Within them, rangers work alone for days at a time, monitoring wildlife, maintaining trails, and responding to calls that sometimes lead them into situations no training manual can prepare them for. Now let us begin with our first story. It was early March of 2016 in the southern Everglades near the boundary of Collier County. Ranger Michael Torres had been stationed at the remote 10,000 Island sector for 6 years. His territory covered nearly 40 square miles of mangrove channels and sawgrass prairie, accessible only by airboat or helicopter. On the afternoon of March 9th, he received a routine call from dispatch about a distress beacon activated somewhere in the Turner River corridor. The coordinates placed it roughly 8 miles southeast of his station, in an area locals called the Cistern Flats, a maze of shallow channels where the water rarely exceeded 2 feet, and the trees grew so dense that sunlight reached the ground only in narrow shafts. Torres loaded his airboat with standard rescue equipment. He carried a medical kit, emergency flares, two-way radio, and handheld GPS unit. The temperature that day reached 86 degrees with humidity near 90%. By 4 in the afternoon, when he departed, the sky had turned the color of old brass. Weather reports predicted thunderstorms after dark, but the distress signal could not wait. Protocol required immediate response to any beacon activation within 12 hours. The airboat moved through the channels with its characteristic roar, the fan behind Torres pushing him forward across water that reflected the darkening sky like tarnished metal. Spanish moss hung from the mangroves in long curtains. The air smelled of decomposition and brine. He followed the GPS coordinates, adjusting his path as the channels narrowed, until the trees pressed so close on either side that branches scraped against the boat's aluminum hull. The noise of the engine made communication with dispatch difficult, so he relied on the GPS and his knowledge of the territory. After 40 minutes of navigation, Torres reached the coordinates. The distress beacon should have been visible. They were designed to float and emit both a radio signal and a flashing orange light. But when he cut the engine and let the airboat drift into a small clearing of open water, he saw nothing. The sudden silence felt immense. Without the roar of the fan, he could hear the natural sounds of the swamp returning, the distant call of a heron, the buzz of dragonflies, the soft lap of water against cypress knees. He activated his handheld radio. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Torres. I'm at the beacon coordinates. No visual confirmation. Conducting area search." The response came through with moderate static. "Copy that, Torres. Beacon signal is still active according to our systems. Should be within 50 yards of your position." Torres began a grid search, using a long pole to push the airboat slowly through the clearing. He checked behind every cluster of roots, every fallen log. The water was the color of strong tea, impossible to see more than a few inches below the surface. He found nothing, no beacon, no boat, no sign that anyone had been in the area recently. But the signal, according to dispatch, continued to transmit. Then he heard a sound that made him pause mid-push with the pole still in the water. It was a voice, distant but distinct, calling out, "Help! Over here!" The direction was unclear, distorted by the dense trees, but it seemed to come from the northeast, deeper into the Cistern Flats. Torres restarted the engine and moved toward the voice, navigating carefully through a channel barely wider than his boat. The trees formed a tunnel overhead. The light took on a greenish cast, he called out as he moved. "This is Florida Fish and Wildlife. Keep making noise. I'm coming to you." The voice called back, but something about it struck him as odd. The tone was flat, almost mechanical, as if someone were reading from a script with no emotion. "Help! Over here!" The exact same words, the exact same inflection. Torres slowed the airboat. His training included recognizing signs of shock or hypothermia, conditions that could affect speech patterns, but this sounded different. It sounded wrong. He moved forward another 100 yards. The channel opened into a second clearing, this one smaller than the first, surrounded by dead trees that stood like gray sentinels. The voice called again. "Help! Over here!" It was louder now, close enough that Torres should have been able to see whoever was calling. But the clearing was empty. Just water and dead trees and the fading afternoon light. Torres cut the engine again. In the silence, he heard the voice once more, but this time it came from behind him, back the way he had come. "Help! Over here!" The same flat tone, the same 2 sentences. He turned the boat around and returned to the first clearing, where he had initially arrived at the beacon coordinates. The voice continued to call, always from a direction just out of sight, always with the same words. That was when he noticed the birds. Every tree in the area was silent. He had been so focused on the voice and the search that he had not registered the absence of wildlife sounds. No herons, no egrets, no insects. The swamp had gone completely quiet, except for that impossible voice moving through the trees. Torres made the decision to return to base. He radioed dispatch with his position and his intent to withdraw, citing equipment malfunction and the approaching storm. Dispatch confirmed. As he started the engine and began navigating back through the channels, the voice called one more time, now distant and fading. "Help! Over here!" He reached his station 90 minutes later, just as the first drops of rain began to fall. When dispatch checked the distress beacon signal remotely, they found that it had stopped transmitting at exactly 4:51 p.m., the same moment Torres had first heard the voice. The beacon was never recovered. No missing person reports were filed in that area during the week before or after Torres's search. In his incident report, filed later that evening, Torres noted that the voice had no echo. In a swamp where sound bounced off water and trees constantly, the voice had sounded as if it were being played through a speaker suspended in dead air. No explanation was provided by the department. The report was classified as inconclusive. 200 miles north, another ranger was keeping watch over a territory where the swamp met the forest in a region known for its isolation. It was late August of 2013, in the Apalachicola National Forest, along the border between Liberty and Franklin counties. Ranger Jennifer Hale had been assigned to a fire watch station built on stilts above a cypress strand, a small wooden structure with panoramic windows and basic amenities. Her shift ran 5 days at a time with 2 days off. During fire season, she would spend her nights scanning the horizon for smoke, monitoring weather conditions, and maintaining radio contact with the district office 40 miles away. The station sat 30 feet above the swamp floor, accessible only by a metal staircase that spiraled around one of the support pillars. The structure itself was maybe 12 feet by 12 feet, a single room with a cot, a desk, a propane stove, and the radio equipment. At night, with the lights off and the windows open, she could hear everything below. The frogs, the owls, the occasional splash of something moving through water. On the night of August 23rd, Hale was 3 days into her rotation. The weather had been clear all week, the fire danger rated moderate. At 10:30 p.m., she was sitting at the desk, filling out her hourly observation log by lantern light. The temperature had dropped to 78 degrees. A light breeze moved through the open windows, carrying the smell of damp earth and vegetation. Everything was normal. Then someone knocked on the door. 3 deliberate knocks, solid and clear. Hale looked up from her log. The door was the only entrance to the station, positioned at the top of the metal staircase. She had not heard anyone climbing the stairs, and those stairs were loud, designed that way intentionally so that rangers would always hear someone approaching. She stood and walked to the door, assuming it was another ranger or perhaps a lost hiker who had seen the station lights. She called through the door, "Who is it?" No response. Just silence, and then 3 more knocks, same rhythm, same force. Hale turned on her flashlight and opened the door. The metal platform at the top of the stairs was empty. She shined the light down the spiral staircase, nothing. She could see all the way to the ground, illuminated in the flashlight beam. No one was there. The swamp below was still, the water reflecting her light in fragmented patches between the trees. She closed the door and returned to her desk, reasoning that the sound might have come from an animal bumping against one of the support pillars. Raccoons sometimes climbed the structure, but the knocks had been too deliberate, too rhythmic. She made a note in her log and continued her work. 20 minutes later, the knocks came again. 3 times, same pattern, same force. This time, Hale did not call out. She moved to the door quickly and opened it fast, hoping to catch whoever was playing a prank. The platform was empty. The stairs were empty. Her flashlight showed nothing but cypress trees and dark water below. She closed the door and locked it. The lock was a simple sliding bolt, more for privacy than security, but it made her feel better. She turned off the lantern and sat in darkness, listening. The normal sounds of the swamp continued: frogs calling, the rustle of leaves. But every few minutes she would hear something else: footsteps on the stairs. Slow, measured footsteps, climbing up from below. They would ascend most of the way, then stop, then silence. Then they would start again, descending back down. Hale did not open the door again. She sat at the desk with her flashlight in hand and her radio within reach. The footsteps continued for over an hour, sometimes climbing, sometimes descending, but never quite reaching the top. At midnight, they stopped. The swamp returned to its usual soundscape. She radioed the district office at 12:15 a.m., reporting possible trespassing activity near her station. The dispatcher noted the call and asked if she needed immediate assistance. Hale said no, that the activity had ceased, but requested that the incident be logged. The dispatcher confirmed and told her to call immediately if anything else occurred. Nothing else did. The rest of the night passed without incident. At dawn, Hale descended the stairs to inspect the area around the station. The ground below was muddy, covered in standing water and thick vegetation. She found no footprints, no disturbance in the mud, no signs that anyone had been near the structure. The stilts showed no marks where someone might have climbed them. When her rotation ended 2 days later, Hale mentioned the incident to the ranger who relieved her. He listened, nodded, and told her that he had heard the knocking too during his previous rotation. Always 3 knocks. Always when he was alone. He had stopped answering the door after the first few times. The district office conducted a brief investigation but found nothing conclusive. No trespassers were ever identified. The station continued to operate and rangers continued to staff it during fire season. In her written statement, Hale noted that the footsteps on the stairs had sounded too heavy to be human. She could not explain why she felt that way, only that the weight and rhythm had seemed wrong, as if something much larger were trying to imitate the sound of a person climbing stairs. The statement was filed without further comment. Farther south, in the heart of the Everglades, a ranger monitoring the traditional lands of the Miccosukee tribe encountered something that led to a 2-week search operation. It was October of 2018. Ranger David Chen was assigned to a sector near the Tamiami Trail, the highway that cuts east-west through the northern Everglades. His responsibilities included wildlife monitoring, invasive species control, and maintaining communication with the Miccosukee tribal rangers who worked in partnership with state authorities. The arrangement was one of mutual respect. The tribe had managed these lands for generations and knew the swamp better than any government employee ever would. On October 7th, Chen was conducting a routine patrol along a levee road that ran parallel to a deep water channel. It was late afternoon, the sun low and orange through the humidity. He was in his patrol truck, windows down, driving slowly and watching for wildlife. The radio in the truck was tuned to the fish and wildlife frequency, with occasional chatter from other rangers in adjacent sectors. At 5:20 p.m., the radio crackled with a transmission that was not on any official frequency. A man's voice, calm and speaking in what Chen recognized as Miccosukee, one of the Miccosukee languages. He did not understand the words, but the tone was clear. It was a request for help. The transmission lasted about 15 seconds, then cut off. Chen stopped the truck and keyed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Chen. I just picked up a transmission in Mikasuki on an unknown frequency. Possible distress call. Can you confirm any Mikasuki Rangers in my area?" Dispatch checked their logs. "Negative, Chen. No tribal rangers are scheduled in your sector today. Can you provide the frequency?" Chen adjusted the radio, trying to find the signal again. He scanned through the bands but heard only static and the normal dispatch chatter. Unable to relocate the frequency, transmission has stopped. Copy, monitor, and report if it resumes. Chen continued his patrol, but the radio remained silent. 20 minutes later, as he was preparing to return to base, the transmission came through again. This time it was clearer, and Chen could hear distress in the speaker's tone. The words were still in Mikasuki, but one phrase was repeated several times, a word that sounded like lost or help. Then the transmission ended abruptly, cut off mid-sentence. Chen immediately contacted the Mikasuki tribal police and explained what he had heard. They agreed to send an officer to meet him at his location. Within 30 minutes, Officer Thomas Billy arrived in a tribal patrol vehicle. Chen played back a recording he had made of the second transmission on his phone. Billy listened carefully, his expression becoming increasingly concerned. "He's saying he's lost," Billy confirmed, "and he's asking for someone named Joseph. But the way he's speaking, it's old. That dialect hasn't been commonly used in decades." They decided to conduct a joint search of the area, broadcasting on multiple frequencies in both English and Mikasuki. For the next 2 hours, as darkness fell, they drove the levee roads and searched on foot where the truck could not go. They found nothing, no abandoned vehicles, no sign of anyone in distress. The radio transmission did not repeat. The next day, the search expanded. Tribal rangers who knew the area intimately joined the effort, along with additional state personnel. Helicopters flew grid patterns over the swamp. Search dogs were brought in. The operation continued for 5 days, covering over 60 square miles of wetlands. They found no trace of anyone lost or injured. On the 6th day, Officer Billy contacted Chen with information that changed the nature of the search. He had spoken with the tribe's elders, playing them the recording Chen had made. One of the elders, a man in his late 80s, recognized the voice. He said it sounded like his father, Joseph Billy, who had died in 1973. Joseph had been a guide in the Everglades, someone who knew every channel and hammock. He had disappeared during a solo trip into the deep swamp and was never found. The elder listened to the recording 3 times. Each time, he became more certain. The voice was asking for someone to find Joseph, and the voice itself was Joseph's. Chen did not know how to process this information. He was a biologist by training, someone who dealt in observable phenomena and data. But he could not dismiss the elder's certainty, nor could he explain the transmission itself. The frequency had never been identified. No radio equipment had been found in the search area that could have broadcast the signal. The search was officially concluded on October 13th. The incident report listed the case as unresolved, noting that no missing persons matched the description and no source for the radio transmission had been located. Chen included in his report that the transmission had been in an older dialect of Mikasuki and that tribal consultation had been conducted. A week after the search ended, Chen was back on patrol in the same sector. At dusk, as he was driving along the same levee road where he had first heard the transmission, his radio crackled. For just a moment, he heard it again, the voice speaking in Mikasuki, asking for Joseph. Then it was gone. He did not report the second occurrence. He wrote in his personal log that some searches have no ending, only the understanding that the swamp keeps what it takes. In the western Everglades, near the Gulf Coast, a ranger encountered something that led her to question whether she had been alone during her overnight shift. It was February of 2015. Ranger Lisa Martinez was assigned to a research facility operated by the Fish and Wildlife Service near the Fakahatchee Strand State Preserve. The facility housed a small fish hatchery used for breeding programs aimed at restoring native species populations. The building was modest, a concrete structure with holding tanks, filtration systems, and a small office. It sat at the end of a dirt road surrounded by sawgrass prairie and scattered cypress domes. The nearest occupied building was over 12 miles away. Martinez was working a night shift, monitoring water quality and feeding schedules for several tanks containing juvenile snook and tarpon. These shifts were usually quiet. She would arrive at dusk, complete her rounds every 2 hours, and leave at dawn. On the night of February 19th, she arrived at 6:30 p.m. The sun was setting, turning the western sky deep red. The temperature had dropped to 62 degrees, unusually cool for that time of year. The facility had motion sensor lights installed along the walkways between the tanks and around the perimeter of the building. They were designed to conserve power, activating only when movement was detected within a 15-foot range. Martinez was familiar with their patterns. They would click on when she walked past, illuminate for 30 seconds, then click off. At 9 p.m., she was in the office completing her first round of data entry when she heard the lights outside activate. Through the window, she could see the walkway lights come on in sequence, as if someone were walking along the path between the tanks. The sequence started at the far end of the facility and moved toward the office. Each light turned on, held for 30 seconds, then clicked off as the next one activated. Martinez stood and looked out the window. She could see the entire walkway from her position. The lights were on, but no one was there. No animals, no movement. Just the lights clicking on and off in perfect sequence, tracking an invisible presence. She grabbed a flashlight and went outside. The air was still and cold. The sawgrass stretched away into darkness. She walked the path where the lights had activated, checking each sensor. They all appeared to be functioning normally. She stood in front of one and waved her hand. It clicked on immediately, then off after 30 seconds. There was no malfunction she could identify. She returned to the office and resumed her work. 20 minutes later, the lights activated again. Same pattern, same sequence, starting from the far end and moving toward the office. This time, Martinez went out immediately, but again saw nothing. The sensors were responding to something, but whatever it was remained invisible. Over the next 3 hours, the pattern repeated 6 more times, always the same path, always starting from the far end, always moving toward the office. Martinez began timing the intervals. They were irregular, ranging from 15 minutes to nearly an hour, with no predictable pattern. At 1:30 a.m., she was standing outside, watching the lights and trying to determine what could be triggering them, when she heard footsteps. They were distinct, the sound of boots on gravel. They were coming from the direction of the parking area, where her truck was the only vehicle. She turned and shined her flashlight toward the sound. The beam illuminated the gravel parking lot and the access road beyond. Nothing was there, but the footsteps continued, moving past her position and heading toward the fish tanks. She tracked the sound with her flashlight, but the beam showed only empty space. The footsteps stopped at one of the holding tanks. Martinez stood motionless, her flashlight pointed at the tank. She could hear breathing, slow, deliberate breaths. Then the sound of water splashing, as if someone were reaching into the tank. She moved closer, keeping the flashlight trained on the area. When she reached the tank and looked inside, the water was disturbed, ripples spreading from the center. But no one was there. Martinez returned to the office and locked the door. She completed the rest of her shift without going outside again, monitoring the tanks through the windows and noting each time the motion lights activated. By dawn, the lights had triggered 14 more times, always following the same path. When her relief arrived at 7 a.m., Martinez filed a detailed report about the night's events. The facility manager ordered a full inspection of the motion sensors and security systems. Technicians found no malfunctions. The sensors were replaced as a precautionary measure. Martinez worked 2 more night shifts at the facility over the following month. Each time, the lights activated in the same pattern. On her 3rd night shift, she noticed something else. The water level in one of the snook tanks had dropped by several inches overnight, even though the filtration system showed no leaks. It was as if something had been drinking from the tank. She requested reassignment to day shifts only. The request was granted without question. The facility manager noted in the maintenance log that the motion sensors at the hatchery appeared to be more sensitive than those at other facilities, possibly due to wildlife activity or environmental factors. Martinez included in her final report a single observation that was not part of the official documentation. She wrote in her personal notes that on her last night at the facility, she had heard a voice near one of the tanks. It had spoken in Spanish, though she could not make out the words. When she checked the area in the morning, she found wet footprints on the concrete footprints that led from the tank to the door, then vanished. Southeast of Lake Okeechobee, in an area managed for controlled burns and wildlife corridors, a ranger supervising a prescribed fire witnessed something that halted the operation for 2 days. It was April of 2017. The Florida Forest Service had scheduled a controlled burn of approximately 800 acres in a sector of the Kissimmee Prairie. Ranger William Foster was the burn boss, responsible for coordinating the ignition crew and ensuring the fire remained within predetermined boundaries. These operations were routine, carefully planned burns that reduced fuel loads and maintained the prairie ecosystem. The weather conditions on April 12th were ideal. Wind speed was steady at 5 to 8 miles per hour from the southeast. Humidity was at 42%. Temperature was 79 degrees. Foster had a crew of 6, along with 2 bulldozers on standby and a helicopter for aerial monitoring. The burn was scheduled to begin at 10 a.m. and continue until all target areas had been ignited, estimated to take 4 to 5 hours. By noon, the operation was proceeding as planned. The fire moved through the dry grass in a controlled front, creating the characteristic low flames and smoke that were expected. Foster maintained radio contact with all crew members, monitoring their positions and the fire's progress. The helicopter pilot reported good visibility and confirmed that the fire was staying within boundaries. At 1:15 p.m., Foster was standing on a dirt access road along the western edge of the burn area when he noticed something moving through the smoke. It was large, much larger than any animal he expected to see in the prairie. He raised his binoculars and tried to focus through the heat shimmer and smoke. The shape was humanoid, but wrong in its proportions. It moved through the flames without reacting to the fire, walking steadily across an area where the grass was actively burning. Foster keyed his radio. "All units, this is Burn Boss. We have something large in the burn area, Sector 3. Can anyone confirm visual?" 2 crew members responded that they saw smoke and flames, but no animals. The helicopter pilot adjusted position and flew closer to Sector 3. His response came back uncertain. "I see movement but cannot identify. Might be a deer. Smoke is too thick for clear visual." Foster kept his binoculars trained on the shape. It had stopped moving and appeared to be standing upright in the middle of the flames. The fire around it was intense flames reaching 6 to 8 feet high. Nothing living should have been able to stand in that environment. He estimated the heat in that area at over 700 degrees. Then the shape turned toward him. Even through the smoke and heat distortion, Foster could see that it was facing his direction. It raised one arm as if pointing or gesturing toward him. Foster lowered his binoculars, suddenly uncomfortable. When he raised them again, the shape was gone. He radioed the helicopter pilot. "Can you do a low pass over Sector 3? I need confirmation of what's down there." The pilot acknowledged and descended to 200 feet, making a slow pass over the area. His report came back negative. "Sector 3 is clear. Heavy fire but no large animals visible, probably just smoke and heat playing tricks." Foster accepted the explanation, but he remained uneasy. He continued monitoring the burn, which proceeded without further incident. By 4:30 p.m., all ignitions were complete, and the fire was allowed to burn naturally within its containment lines. The crew began demobilization procedures. That evening, while reviewing GPS tracking data from the crew members' radios, Foster noticed something anomalous. At 1:16 p.m., the same time he had seen the shape in the flames, all 6 crew members had reported radio interference lasting approximately 3 minutes. Their transmissions had been interrupted by static and a low humming sound. The helicopter pilot had experienced the same interference. Foster's own radio had functioned normally, but he had been standing away from the crew at the time. 2 days later, as part of standard post-burn assessment, Foster returned to Sector 3 with a Forest Service ecologist to evaluate fire effects. They walked through the burned area, noting ash depth, soil condition, and vegetation response. In the center of Sector 3, where Foster had seen the shape, they found an area of approximately 40 square feet where the ground had been burned far more intensely than surrounding areas. The soil was fused into a glassy substance, something that required temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees, far hotter than a grass fire could produce. The ecologist took samples for analysis. The laboratory report came back with inconclusive results. The soil showed evidence of extreme heat, but no accelerants were detected, and no explanation for the localized intensity was provided. The report suggested possible lightning strike, though no lightning had been recorded during the burn. Foster filed his incident report without mentioning the shape he had seen. He noted only the radio interference and the anomalous burn pattern. The report was reviewed by the district forester, who agreed that the burn had been conducted properly and that the anomalous area was likely caused by natural factors. In his private notes, Foster wrote that he had felt watched during the entire burn. He described the shape as something that should not have been there and knew it was being observed. He requested reassignment to a different district shortly after. The request was approved. In the northwestern region of the Everglades, along a popular canoe trail used by researchers and recreational paddlers, a ranger conducting a routine inspection encountered conditions that led to a temporary trail closure. It was January of 2019. Ranger Patricia Howe was assigned to assess trail conditions along the Wilderness Waterway, a 99-mile canoe route that winds through mangrove estuaries and coastal prairies. The trail was used year-round but saw increased traffic during the winter months when temperatures were cooler and insects less aggressive. Howe's assignment was to paddle a 16-mile section, checking campsites and markers and documenting any maintenance needs. She launched from the Everglades City Marina at 7:30 a.m. on January 21st. The weather was clear, with temperature at 68 degrees and winds light from the northeast. The water was calm, reflecting the pale winter sky. She paddled her canoe south along the marked trail, following the channel through dense mangroves. The trail was well maintained, with markers every half-mile and designated campsites at regular intervals. By 10 a.m., Howe had reached the halfway point of her route. She pulled ashore at a small beach area to rest and record her observations. The site was clean, the marker intact. She ate a quick lunch and reviewed her notes. Everything was in order. She launched again at 10:30, intending to complete the return paddle by mid-afternoon. 20 minutes into her return trip, the fog appeared. It came without warning, rolling in from the west like a wall of gray. Within moments, visibility dropped to less than 20 feet. Howe slowed her paddling and moved closer to the mangroves on her right, using them as a reference point. Fog was not uncommon in the Everglades, but it usually formed gradually. This had materialized in seconds. The temperature dropped. Howe estimated it fell at least 10 degrees within 5 minutes. Her breath became visible in the air. She pulled on a jacket and continued paddling, now navigating primarily by the trail markers. The fog was so dense that each marker appeared suddenly, looming out of the gray just a few feet ahead. Then she realized the markers were wrong. They were still the standard blue and white trail markers, but they were appearing on her left instead of her right. She had been following the channel north, which meant the mangroves should be on her right and the open water on her left. But the markers were showing on the left, indicating she had somehow crossed to the opposite side of the channel without realizing it. Howe stopped paddling and pulled out her compass. It showed her heading as northwest, which was incorrect. She should have been heading northeast. She adjusted her bearing and continued, but within minutes the compass reading changed again, now showing west. She tapped the compass, thinking it might be malfunctioning, but the needle moved smoothly and seemed to be functioning normally. She tried her GPS unit. The screen showed her position as approximately half a mile east of where she believed herself to be, in an area of open water that she knew was too shallow to paddle. She turned off the GPS, waited 30 seconds, and turned it back on. The position had not changed. The fog grew thicker. Howe could no longer see more than 10 feet in any direction. The temperature continued to drop. She estimated it was now in the low 50s, impossibly cold for the Everglades even in winter. She put on her life jacket more securely and began paddling again, moving slowly and trying to find any recognizable landmark. That was when she heard the other canoe. It was the sound of a paddle dipping into water, steady and rhythmic, very close. She called out, "Hello, can you hear me? I'm having navigation trouble." No response. Just the sound of paddling, now moving past her on the right. She turned her canoe in that direction and called again. "I'm a park ranger. Please respond." The paddling continued, moving away from her. She followed the sound, paddling harder to try to catch up. The fog swirled around her. The sound stayed just ahead, always moving, never stopping. She followed it for what felt like 10 minutes, losing all sense of direction. Then the sound stopped. The fog began to lift as quickly as it had arrived. Within minutes, visibility improved to 100 feet, then 200. The temperature rose. Howe found herself in a section of channel she recognized the exact area where the fog had first appeared. She checked her watch. It was 11:10 a.m., meaning she had been in the fog for approximately 20 minutes. She checked her GPS again. It now showed her position as correct, matching her visual observations. The compass read north-northeast, as it should. Everything had returned to normal. Howe completed her return paddle without further incident, reaching the marina at 2:15 p.m. She filed a report about the fog, noting its unusual density and rapid onset. She did not mention the navigational anomalies or the sound of the other canoe. Those details she kept in a separate personal log. 3 days later, she received a call from another ranger who worked the same trail system. He asked if she had experienced unusual fog during her recent patrol. When she confirmed, he told her that he had encountered the same phenomenon on 2 occasions over the past year. Both times, his instruments had malfunctioned, and both times he had heard paddling sounds that led him in circles. He had not reported it officially because he had no evidence and no explanation. Howe updated her report to include the navigational issues and the acoustic phenomena. The trail section was temporarily closed for 1 week while Park Service personnel investigated. They found no environmental factors that would cause such dense fog or explain the instrument failures. The trail was reopened with a notice advising paddlers to carry backup navigation tools and to avoid solo travel during winter months when fog was possible. In her final notes, Howe wrote that the paddling sounds had not echoed. In an environment of water and mangroves, everything echoed. But those paddle strokes had been clean and flat, as if they were coming from a recording. She never worked that section of trail alone again. On the eastern edge of the Big Cypress National Preserve, at a remote research station used by biologists studying wetland ecosystems, a ranger experienced a night that led her to request immediate transfer. It was May of 2014. Ranger Amanda Cruz was covering a shift at the research station while the regular staff was away at a conference. The station was a modest facility, a single-story building with a laboratory, a small dormitory with 4 bunks, a kitchen, and a storage area. It sat on a raised platform to protect against flooding, surrounded by cypress swamp and accessed by a narrow boardwalk that connected to a dirt road half a mile away. Cruz arrived on the afternoon of May 8th. She had worked at the station before and was familiar with its routines. Her responsibilities were simple: maintain the equipment, check the data loggers in the field, and ensure the facility remained secure. She was scheduled to stay 3 nights alone before the research team returned. The first night passed without incident. Cruz completed her fieldwork, prepared dinner, and spent the evening reviewing data and reading. She went to bed at 10 p.m., sleeping lightly as she always did in unfamiliar places. The sounds of the swamp filtered through the screens: frogs, nightbirds, the occasional splash of something moving through water. The second night changed everything. At 11:30 p.m., Cruz was lying in her bunk, reading by flashlight, when she heard the front door open. It was distinct, the sound of the latch releasing and the door swinging inward. She sat up immediately. The door was visible from her bunk through the open dormitory doorway. She could see it clearly in the ambient light from her flashlight. The door was closed. She called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" No response. She got out of bed and walked to the front room. The door was locked, just as she had left it. The latch was secure. The boardwalk beyond was empty. She opened the door and shined her flashlight into the swamp. Nothing moved. The night was still. She closed the door, checked the lock twice, and returned to bed. 20 minutes later, she heard it again, the latch releasing, the door opening. This time she got up immediately and ran to the front room. The door was closed and locked. She had not imagined it. The sound had been clear and unmistakable. Cruz decided to stay awake. She moved to the kitchen, made coffee, and sat at the table where she could see the front door directly. She waited. At 12:45 a.m., she heard footsteps on the boardwalk. They were heavy, deliberate, moving toward the station. She grabbed her flashlight and positioned herself near the door. The footsteps climbed the 3 steps to the platform, then stopped. Silence. Cruz waited, her hand on the door handle, ready to open it and confront whoever was outside. She counted to 30 in her head. Then she unlocked the door and pulled it open fast. The platform was empty. The boardwalk was empty. Her flashlight beam swept across the area, illuminating cypress knees and dark water. Nothing was there. But when she looked down at the platform where she was standing, she saw wet footprints, large prints, much larger than her own, leading from the edge of the platform to the door, then stopping. Cruz backed inside and locked the door. She did not sleep the rest of the night. She sat in the kitchen with every light in the station on, her radio within reach. The footsteps came twice more before dawn, each time stopping at the door, each time leaving wet prints that faded within minutes. At first light, Cruz went outside to examine the area more carefully. The boardwalk showed no signs of disturbance. The water below was still. She took photographs of everything, though by the time she retrieved her camera, the footprints had completely vanished. She radioed the district office at 7 a.m., requesting permission to leave the station early. She cited a personal emergency. Permission was granted. Cruz packed quickly and left within the hour. She submitted her resignation the following week. In her exit interview, she told the supervisor that the station was not secure and that she did not feel safe working there alone. She did not mention the footsteps or the sounds of the door opening. Those details she shared only with another ranger she trusted, someone who had worked in the preserve for over 20 years. That ranger told her that the station had been built on the site of an old hunting camp that dated back to the 1920s. A man had died there, though the circumstances were unclear. Some people said he drowned. Others said he simply disappeared into the swamp one night and never returned. The old camp had burned down in the 1960s. The research station was built 15 years later. Cruz never returned to the facility. The research team came back and reported no unusual activity. The station continued to operate normally, but when rangers were assigned shifts there, they were no longer asked to work alone. From that point forward, the station was always staffed by at least 2 people. No official reason was given for the policy change. In the southern reaches of the Everglades, on a tree island known locally as Possum Hammock, a ranger searching for an injured hiker found something that remained unexplained despite extensive investigation. It was November of 2012. Ranger Robert Jimenez received a call from dispatch at 3:45 p.m. on November 16th. A hiker had activated a personal locator beacon in the area of Possum Hammock, approximately 7 miles southwest of the Flamingo Visitor Center. The terrain was difficult, a mix of shallow water, sawgrass, and scattered tree islands. Access was possible only on foot or by airboat. Jimenez took an airboat, accompanied by a Park Service EMT named Sarah Collins. The beacon coordinates placed the hiker on the hammock itself, a dense stand of hardwood trees covering about 2 acres. They reached the area at 4:30 p.m., just as the sun was beginning to lower. The water around the hammock was 18 inches deep, dark with tannins. They secured the airboat and waded to the tree line. The hammock was typical for the region gumbo limbo, poisonwood and strangler fig, creating a canopy overhead with thick understory vegetation. They called out as they moved through the trees, following the beacon signal on their handheld receiver. The signal grew stronger as they pushed deeper into the hammock. They found the beacon 15 minutes later, lying on the ground at the base of a large fig tree. The device was intact, still transmitting, but there was no hiker, no backpack, no signs of injury or struggle. Just the beacon, sitting on a bed of dead leaves. Jimenez keyed his radio. "Dispatch, we've located the beacon but no patient. Beginning area search." Dispatch confirmed and stood by. Jimenez and Collins spread out, searching in a grid pattern. They looked for footprints, disturbed vegetation, any indication of which direction the hiker might have gone. The hammock was small enough that a thorough search should have taken less than an hour. As they worked, the light began to fade. At 5:45 p.m., with dusk approaching, Collins called Jimenez over to a spot near the center of the hammock. She had found something, a piece of fabric caught on a branch, about 6 feet off the ground. It was bright orange, consistent with hiking gear. Below the branch, the ground showed signs of disturbance, as if someone had fallen or lain there. They searched the immediate area more carefully. Jimenez noticed something odd about the trees. Several of them had marks on their trunks, about chest height, long scratches in the bark, as if something had clawed at them. The marks were fresh, the exposed wood still pale. As they were examining the scratches, the light appeared. It started as a faint glow, hovering among the trees about 50 yards away. Jimenez thought at first it was a flashlight, another search party perhaps. But the light was wrong, too steady, too uniform. It did not bob or waver the way a flashlight carried by a walking person would move. Collins saw it too. "Do you see that?" Jimenez nodded. He called out, "This is the Park Service. If you can hear us, please respond." The light remained stationary. Jimenez and Collins moved toward it, pushing through the vegetation. As they got closer, the light seemed to retreat, maintaining the same distance. They followed it for several minutes, moving through the hammock in a direction that would take them back toward the water. Then the light split. It became 2 lights, then 3, then 5, all hovering at the same height, all moving slowly away from them. Jimenez stopped. Something about the movement was unnatural, too synchronized. The lights were not flashlights. They were something else. Collins touched his arm. "We should go back." They returned to the airboat as darkness settled over the hammock. The lights remained visible in the trees, now clustered together again, glowing with that steady, impossible luminescence. Jimenez radioed dispatch, requesting additional search personnel and explaining that the situation required more resources than 2 people could provide. A full search operation was launched the next morning. A team of 12 rangers and volunteers swept the hammock and surrounding area. They brought dogs. They used drones equipped with thermal imaging cameras. The search continued for 3 days. They found nothing beyond the beacon and the piece of orange fabric. On the 4th day, a kayaker reported seeing someone matching the hiker's description at a boat ramp 40 miles north of Possum Hammock. Law enforcement followed up and located the hiker, who was confused but uninjured. He had no memory of how he had gotten to the boat ramp or why he had been at Possum Hammock. The last thing he remembered clearly was setting up his tent at a designated campsite 3 days earlier. Everything between then and waking up at the boat ramp was blank. Medical evaluation found no head injuries, no drugs in his system, no explanation for the memory loss. The hiker was released with a recommendation to follow up with a neurologist. Jimenez filed a report that included all the physical evidence, the beacon, the fabric, the scratches on the trees. He did not include the lights in the official report. He mentioned them only to Collins, who agreed they had both seen something but could not explain what. 2 months later, Jimenez was assigned to a different sector. He never worked at Possum Hammock again. Other rangers patrolled the area regularly, but none reported unusual activity. The hammock remained accessible to hikers, though few visited it. In his personal files, Jimenez kept a photograph he had taken with his phone that night. It showed the tree line of the hammock at dusk. Among the trees, barely visible, were several points of light that the camera had captured. They appeared as pale orbs, evenly spaced, hanging in the air where no artificial lights should have been. He never showed the photograph to anyone officially. It remained in his files as a reminder that some searches end with questions rather than answers. The swamps of Florida remain among the most extensive wetland systems in North America. They stretch across thousands of square miles, ecosystems so complex that science continues to discover new aspects of their ecology and behavior. Within them, rangers work in isolation, documenting wildlife, maintaining trails, and responding to calls that sometimes lead them to places where the familiar rules no longer seem to apply. The 7 accounts you have heard tonight were drawn from incident reports, ranger testimonies, and archived records maintained by the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission and the National Park Service. Each one has been verified through official channels. The rangers involved were trained professionals with years of experience in their respective territories. What they encountered defied that training and challenged their understanding of the environments they had spent their careers learning to navigate. Some of the rangers requested transfers. Others continued their work, filing their reports and returning to patrol the same areas where they had experienced the unexplained. The swamp does not offer explanations. It does not provide closure. It simply continues, indifferent to the questions left behind. These stories remain in the files, marked as inconclusive or unresolved, the distress beacons that transmit from empty locations, the voices that call from the fog, the footsteps on stairs that lead nowhere, the lights that move through the trees with purpose but without source. They are recorded, documented, and filed away, evidence of something that exists at the edge of what we can observe and measure. The rangers who patrol these swamps carry their radios, their GPS units, their training. They follow protocols designed to keep them safe in environments where water and land merge into something that cannot always be clearly defined. And sometimes, despite all of that preparation, they encounter something that reminds them how vast and unknowable the landscape truly is. If you or someone you know has experienced something similar while working in remote areas, if you have a verified account that deserves to be documented and shared, leave it in the comments below. These stories deserve to be told, not as entertainment, but as records of what happens when trained observers encounter the limits of their understanding. The swamps will be there tomorrow and the day after and the years beyond. The rangers will continue their work, and some